Why did you come to the theater today?
Mostly for entertainment.
Because I'm celebrating my grandson's birthday.
Because I find the theater a living experience.
What do you think a play has that a movie doesn't have?
Well, it has the spontaneity of the life of live actors.
The idea of being almost into the play, even if you're seated fairly far from the stage, you nonetheless feel that you're right into it, and this is something that movies don't have.
I think when you're at a play, you become a part of the show. I feel like I'm involved in it much more than I'm in a movie.
It's a one-to-one correspondence. You feel that you're there, you're with the actors, you're sitting there.
Do you think the theater as an art form is outdated?
No.
Not at all.
We're so electronic now that if we stop anything that's live, we're going to be real sorry because it's very hard to communicate as it is.
It goes in cycles. We're going into a new cycle.
In the theater?
Yes, certainly. So the theater goes on, and the theater's been dying since the Greeks. It's not going to die.
Great.
It keeps regenerating.
Would you like to meet the playwright?
I certainly would.
Why is that?
Because I'd like to know where he got some of his ideas.
Very much so.
Why?
Because I think anyone could have put this story together from just that one scene. I think takes a tremendous amount of imagination. And it sort of boggles my mind that someone could put something on for 2.5 hours and keep an audience as enraptured as they do.
Definitely.
Why?
I think it's an interesting, he'd be very interesting.
Do you think the theater is only for college graduates?
Absolutely not.
No.
Why?
No, it's an emotional experience. Everybody feels.
No, not at all. I think the theater can teach something to everyone. I think I bring my children to the theater, and I think my children have learned a lot more from going to theater than they probably can from many other art forms.
Absolutely not. It's for everybody.
Do you know how a person becomes a playwright?
I have absolutely no idea.
I don't know.
I really don't know.
Not really, no.
Contemporary theater in America. Broadway, off-Broadway, off-Broadway, regional theater. What is it, and where's it going? Richard Barr, theatrical producer, helps to answer these questions by engaging in dialogue with those who literally create contemporary theater, the playwrights. Mr. Barr has been involved in all aspects of drama since serving as executive assistant to Orson Welles on his famous radio play War of the Worlds in 1938 to the production of Edward Albee's major works, including Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. In addition to producing many Broadway plays by established writers, he's provided encouragement to young playwrights whose experimental works he produced off-Broadway. In this program, Mr. Barr will set the stage for dialogue with the playwrights by placing contemporary theater in perspective and tracing the origins of off-Broadway, sharing his knowledge and experience which contributed to the growth of contemporary drama.
I went 10 years without ever being in a bar. The whole 60s. I mean, I was active then. Now, I really don't know what I'm doing. I have these terrible fights with my husband, Robbie. And I wind up here.
Well, let me start, strangely enough, with Broadway, because that's where off-Broadway started in one sense. Without going into the economics of Broadway, I can only tell you that it has become prohibitively expensive. Contrary to most thoughts, this is not due to unions, though there are very serious union restrictions on Broadway. But it has become because the percentages that actors, writers, directors receive, and in the rental that the theater receives, are based on the gross. In other words, we call those royalties. In the old days, meaning not more than 25 or 35 years ago, gross was, a nice gross in a theater would be $15,000. You would do very well. Today, with a one-set show and 4 or 5 people, $40,000 to $45,000 is a reasonable figure that you figure you're going to have to make in order to break even. You're not even making any money at that point. Well, with a system like this, and with the expenses involved, it's obviously very dangerous to experiment. Consequently, what happened on or about 1950, 51 or 2, is that the people who wanted to do theater in their own way went to off-Broadway theaters. Now, there weren't very many of those. There were some theaters around which hadn't really been used, but various producers, primarily young producers, and originally Joe Quintero started the Circle in the Square, and Mr. Atkinson came down and reviewed Summer and Smoke and raved about it, and that was really the beginning of the off-Broadway movement. Now, off-Broadway is really, or was really, a miniature Broadway in one sense. All the actors were in Actors' Equity. We had to deal with the various unions, not as many at first, but the unions in the same way that we had to deal with Broadway, but it was much, much less expensive. As a result, one could dare do something that was not necessarily going to have to gross $30,000, $40,000 a week in order to make itself possible. It also had another advantage off-Broadway. The control was not as divided as it was on Broadway. When you're dealing with a great deal of money, obviously you have to decide how you're going to get the money back, and when you begin to have several people involved in that, such as the producer, sometimes a named director, occasionally, but not often enough, an author, and certainly a star, and sometimes even a difficult designer, you have usually a battle. Not always, but very often. At least you have divided authority more often than you should. Consequently, some of us decided, and this is essentially the reason that I decided to go off Broadway, having produced several things on Broadway, quite a few as a matter of fact, prior to that, and having discovered a marvelous play called Zoo Story, I decided to go off Broadway and return the control of the theater to the author. Bill Inge had a great deal of trouble in Picnic because Josh Logan insisted upon a changed ending and a great deal of text changes. Bill came to my house one night after that and said, I've just won the Critics Award, and I think he won the Pulitzer Prize for it, and I'm a very rich man and I'm miserably unhappy. And I said, well, why? And he said, because they changed my play. And I said, why did you let them? He said, I couldn't control it. That is essentially an example of what happened as to why most of us went off-Broadway. Off-Broadway was much cheaper, off-Broadway was more controllable, and the critics began to notice that something new was in the air. Now, this was about 1950. That went along rather well for quite a number of years. The Living Theater did some extraordinary shows, developed one or two new playwrights. We were very active at the Cherry Lane. Albee wasn't the only person that we had begun. And there sprang up a number of off-Broadway shows to the point where off-Broadway exceeded Broadway. One time there were over 100 productions off-Broadway in a given year. There were never that many, at least not within living memory, on Broadway. Off-Broadway, however, as a result of the fact that it became fairly lucrative for some, and those are the ones that they used as an example when they began saying, well, the unions have to come in, the author has to get more, the actors have to get more. As a result, finally, equity made it almost prohibitive for us to produce off-Broadway because we had to raise not as much money as a Broadway production, but close enough so that it was more interesting to go on Broadway. In the meantime, however, there was a new thing developing in New York, which was called the coffee houses.
Truth is, I used to know a place better than this. It was a little hole-in-the-wall West Village coffee house called the Opera Buffet. We did plays. We made a living by peddling coffee and pastry and greasy sandwiches. And twice a night we did plays. We? I was one of us. Them. There. Then. The Buffo. It was the first place that did that. The first place where we got together and put on plays without worrying about whether we were going to get reviewed or become a star or move it to Broadway or get a grant or anything else in God's forsaken gonorrhea green underworld except that we wanted to do it. We got away with it by calling it a coffee house. But what it was a temple.
The original coffee house, where theater became an interesting part, was the Cafe Chino on Cornelia Street, run by Joe Chino. The other interesting coffee house was run by Ellen Stewart on 2nd Avenue, called La Mama's. Joe Chino is dead now. Unfortunately, he committed suicide.
Joe Chino was one of the most marvelous human beings ever upon this earth. Began Chino in Cafe Chino in 1958. It was at 21 Cornelia Street. Joe was a poet and a dancer, and he greatly loved poetry. And so he began by having poetry readings of original plays. And from time to time, there would be a dance. It could be a small little dance, ballet, or whatever the person would want to dance. And from that, the poetry and the dance evolved into doing short one-act plays by people wanting to be playwrights. He had a beautiful place. Being Italian, it had quite an Italian flourish, with beautiful things hanging just everywhere. And he had the reputation for having the best coffees, and drinks like that were being served in coffee house in those days, were always Joe Chino's specialties. I would like to tell you that I don't think that enough can be said about his fantastic contribution to the arts in general, because so many persons who first began with him and who've made now valid contributions, or what are considered valid contributions, certainly started with him and through his encouragement. Because Joe many times would meet a person and would tell them, I think that you can do this, or I think that you can do that. And it would only then that the person would even attempt to try to do things.
Buffo was a ballet dancer who got too fat. So he opened the coffee house with the idea that it would be a place for his theatrical and dance friends to congregate. Well, he picked a location that was so dumb that nobody came. He couldn't go home. You're not supposed to be a Sicilian and a ballerina. So his family kept the place going to keep him out of sight. It became the central den of Buffo and a few of his insane and impoverished friends. Every reject, freak, booby-hatch trustee, angelic ex-con, self-styled folk singer, and second coming of Christer passed through the Buffo, eating free and pasting pictures on the wall, and sooner or later started doing quaint 1950 poetry readings. Then madrigal singings, and then a play now and then.
And if you wanted to act and you didn't have a play, you could write one so that you could be in it. And if you wanted to direct and you didn't have a play to direct, you could write a play so that you could direct it. I mean, there was no particular kind of way by which persons were selected. For myself, and since I didn't know anything at all about theater, I was regarded as having a very strange taste for the plays that I liked. I don't know if you know, but we were the first producers of Harold Pinter, because I liked his work, and we did The Room in 1962. Well, everybody knows who Harold Pinter is, but at that time, people took a dim view of Harold Pinter, but I adored him.
For a long while, this attracted the people that could not even get a production on off-Broadway. They couldn't possibly get on Broadway. The only writer that we managed to establish on Broadway was Albee.
Some of the playwrights just walked off the streets. Many friends that we knew began writing plays. They hadn't written plays before, but they started. So, because they saw what one person was doing, and so they would try. But other than that, they heard somehow playwrights managed to, or would-be playwrights, managed to hear about La Mama or the Café Chino, and they brought their plays and we put them on.
Most of the younger writers found it more interesting for them because they could control their product by going to the Chino, putting on their own show, or to Café La Mama.
Well, the playwright certainly had all control as to how he wanted his play done. In our beginnings, the playwright always selected his director, and for a large part, he selected his cast. Many instances, he directed his plays himself. When you speak of controls, you must remember there were not that many directors to direct plays. And so one had to do as best you could. And so far as controls, nobody's sort of controlling anything.
We have avoided all those places by now where we think we're not, and where we think we're not in control, and we just go around from place to place where we're guaranteed that we're in control of the production.
Lanford Wilson, also at the Café Chino, did a play called This Is the Rill Speaking, which was kind of a work piece for the Rhymers of Eldritch, which we're later going to see sections of in this series. The Rill Speaking was also a tale of a small town in which all of the actors were on stage at once, and they simply stood there and spoke their lines. They were interrelated, and they may have looked at each other, but there was no movement, there was no scenery of any kind, and there was nothing that would give you the idea that you were watching a play. Of course, all of this took place in the space of about, 8 feet, I would say, if that much, 6 to 8 feet. And that is the way most of the shows at the Café Chino were done.
Total theater, for us, began on East 9th Street because we had only one entrance to this tiny little cellar. And in an attempt not to use the bathroom always for exits, we began to use the street door or the basement door that led to the street. So before the play began, from around the back, the actors would be placed in the street. Now, if you can imagine a tiny little room, and the chairs that we had besides soapboxes were 6 large rocking chairs. We had a few tables that we built ourselves. And the actors had to manage to get from the door to come in, through the rocking chairs, past the coffee bar, over by the bathroom where the stage was. And this was a bit of a handicap, particularly since we only had 2 lights, which were made out of tin cans, and we didn't have any way to turn the lights off but to pull them from the plug, which many times left the actor in darkness while we fumbled trying to put the plug back to get the lights on. So somebody hit upon the idea to start the play. As the actors would come into the door, it wouldn't be so noticeable that they were trying to get to the stage. And this idea worked, and many playwrights, we didn't have that many then, but the few that we did have, began to write plays that would start at the door, because it turned out to be interesting. But this was the beginning of our audience participation, because if you couldn't get past the rocking chair, you stopped there and you said your lines on cue.
Well, we decided that it was time to see what could be done about these writers at the coffee houses. And while I don't want to take any special credit, we certainly did start with what we called our Playwrights unit. And there we did, on a regular stage, we rented, when I say we, Albee, Clinton Wilder, and I, rented a regular, good off-Broadway theater called the Van Dam. And the Van Dam Theater on Van Dam Street, obviously, was a 190-seat house in perfect condition. We began doing play after play after play. And we did them with Broadway casts, or let us say very fine professional actors, and directors, and to a certain extent designers, though we minimized the design because we didn't have enough money. But the reason that they came to us was simply because we were at that time, had produced Virginia Woolf on Broadway and were active, and therefore they felt that maybe if they played with us that there would be some kind of a future in their work. And this, of course, turned out to be quite true, not only of the playwrights, but many of the actors and directors who came there.
Well, the most encouraging thing is that there are over, now in existence, 200 off-Broadway theaters that do only showcase. So, whereas a playwright 10 years ago had maybe 4 places to go to try, he's got 200 now.
As luck would have it, a critic from the Village Voice was there that night, looking for deaf-mute boys. And he wrote us up the next week as the latest thing in drama. Next thing we knew, we had to hire a waiter. Then about a zillion poets, playwrights, diarists, graffiti collectors discovered that there was a place where they could produce plays and eat. Then we hired a dishwasher, who had to be a frustrated set designer, and a host who had to be a frustrated costume designer, lighting designer, and had revolutionary ideas in menu layout. Well, somewhere around there, the mid-60s must have passed, because I remember it was 1966 when I found myself with a day off in the hospital. And I noticed in the paper that there were 125 underground theaters. 3 of our playwrights had books coming out. 1 had a show on Broadway, and 1 had a TV show, and 1 had bleeding ulcers. That was me.
The off-Broadway situation, as I say, had become so expensive that they began running to any place they could find to put a play on. Well, instead of a few doing this, we now have over 100 different off-Broadway places to play. I hesitate to say theaters because some of them are so small, really 25, 35 seats, that while they are a theater because there's a stage and people are sitting in an audience, it is not equivalent to what used to be called an off-Broadway theater, which was generally kept in good condition and had seats and lights and ushers and all that sort of thing. And these particular workshops began moving all over town, mostly because they couldn't be seen anywhere else, and they insisted upon doing their own work.
We've never been controlled by any monies that we've received. We've never been given any particular discipline or rules to follow, other than the fiscal ones, that is to keep books and to have accountants, certified accountants and the like, which is a natural thing. But any artistic restraint, absolute none.
Well, since the Broadway theater is the only theater in the Western world that is not subsidized to some extent, do you think that there is a real opportunity for young playwrights to write for Broadway, providing, let us say, the system changed to the extent that the pressures were reduced because of subsidy? Bob?
I don't understand things like subsidy. I think, like all artists, I drool at the idea of people giving me a lot of money so I can do what I want to do.
Well, I'm talking about subsidy to get your play on at all.
And on the other hand, I'm terrified of subsidy in the sense of, are they going to be telling me what to do?
So far, the subsidy that has occurred in this country has not told the playwright what to do. That's certainly true of the endowment, and it's certainly true of the New York Arts Council. They've been very, very good about not trying to tell the artist in whatever field what to do.
I think if I were subsidized, I would feel basically an enormous responsibility to my audience, because it's their, it would be basically their taxes or whatever
money, right,
that would be subsidizing me. But you always have some restrictions on what you do, whether it's the size of your stage, or the size of your budget, or the length of time you have to get a show on, or the fact that it's tax money coming in and you've got to do something to repay those people for the tax money. In that sense, I'd be for it. If it wound up with people telling me what to do, I wouldn't do it for the same reason that I turned down some movie offers since Kennedy's Children came up.
And off-Broadway is called that simply because that's what it is way off-Broadway. but it is distinguished from off-Broadway because it is generally, we have to say this, not professional in one sense. I don't mean they're not good, I don't mean they're not imaginative, I mean that they are not controlled by equity and unions, though equity is now trying to control because they feel that that's an area that they want jurisdiction and there's going to be a big fight about it. But at the moment, they're proliferating, and at the moment, they are producing more new plays than any other country in the world. And that is what is happening, and that's where American contemporary theater is.
I'm very happy to say that off-Broadway, off-Broadway, regional theaters, Broadway, and off-Broadway are all going to be a very valid contributing part to the theater arts of America, because America certainly now, in the last 10 years, has blossomed in theater as it never did before. I don't think that any one component, those of which I mentioned, is absolutely responsible for its growth. But the very fact that we have all of these different types of theaters functioning and growing and expanding means general expansion in theater in America, for which I really rejoice. I wish that all of them will be successful.
It has to change because, unfortunately, the majority of work being done, with this very few exceptions, really are what I call the theater of immediacy. They take an immediate situation. It may be a political one, it may be a social one, it could even be a psychological one. And they take an immediate situation and they make a play of it, and sometimes they work. These playwrights are going to have to grow and put their plays into a situation where the metaphor takes over, meaning that the idea of the play is larger than the immediate subject matter with which they are concerning themselves. It's going to have to be a playwright who goes into the nature of the human condition, puts it into a metaphor, and writes beautiful English with certain type of attention to matter, form, and content in the old-fashioned way. Ionesco says, and I think quite rightly, the real avant-garde is a return to the tradition.
All soft and lovely. And then I dust myself dry with this perfume dusting powder. And then I do my nails. Oh, hand and foot. I polish them with this clear, lovely, subtle, clear polish. And then I dress myself slowly in these things I never, ever wore anywhere else. Underwear, no, lingerie. And all pink and black lace. Stockings of silk. No, not nylon at all. Silk. Dark and seamless and very expensive. And then a gown that looked all heavy with glitter, but was really light and lovely and clinging. And elegant little black silk pumps. And a single little dime, a real one. The platinum chain. And then a boa. That I'd just gone crazy for and worked tech.
Hound? Hey, Hound. What are you shaking for? I got a roast bone from Cora's for you. Yeah. Here. There you are. Go to it. Them guns scare you, do they? Them hunters? Hell, you should have seen it when the mines was working. With the mines running and the dynamite and the what you call it.
Contemporary theater in America. Broadway, off-Broadway, off-Broadway, regional theater. What is it, and where is it going? Richard Barr, theatrical producer, helps to answer these questions by engaging in dialogue with those who literally create the contemporary theater, the playwrights. In a preceding program, Mr. Barr traced the origin of contemporary theater from Broadway to the cafe theater. In the remainder of this series, Mr. Barr introduces us to emerging contemporary playwrights, some of whom have seen their plays go from the cafe to Broadway. Robert Patrick is the author of Kennedy's Children and has had more than 125 of his plays produced off and off Broadway. He has won many theatrical awards, including the Glasgow Citizens Theatre World Playwriting Award, and one of his plays, Camera Obscura, has been produced over 1,000 times throughout the world. Mr. Patrick was born in Texas, came to New York City in 1961, and is being interviewed in Phoebe's Bar, which was the inspiration for his play Kennedy's Children. Lanford Wilson has written more than 50 produced plays, including The Rhymers of Eldridge and Hot L. Baltimore, which won the New York City Drama Critics Circle Award. Mr. Wilson was born in the mountains of Missouri and has been called brilliant by Newsweek and one of the country's most talented playwrights by the New York Times.
I have suggested that the theater in New York, particularly in Manhattan, was more exciting now and was producing more new plays than possibly the rest of the world combined. Much of this, of course, is off-Broadway, which we've also discussed and described. Today we're going to discuss and talk about two playwrights who actually began off-Broadway and finally have arrived on Broadway, what their comments are about how they got there, and what they think of the relative values of off-Broadway and Broadway, and where they think they are going to take the American theater. Robert Patrick and Lanford Wilson, both of whom, by strange coincidence, I met at the Cafe Chino many years ago. The Cafe Chino, as you remember, was the small coffee shop on Cornelia Street, which attracted new playwrights, and I'm going to ask both Lance and Bob to tell us why they began there, or what attracted them to the Cafe Chino, and what happened afterwards. So why don't we start with you, Bob? What happened to you, and how did you find the Chino, and what happened when you found it?
Well, I came to New York to stay with a friend in 1961, and I went to his house and left my luggage there, and asked his landlady which way was Greenwich Village, because I had vague artistic aspirations. And I got on the subway and got out in front of Lowe's Sheridan Theater and followed a Salvation Army band parade down 7th Avenue. And when I got to Sheridan Square, I said, oh, this looks like the Village in the movies. And went down the next street and the next one. I wound up in the Cafe Chino. It was open, and they were having a rehearsal of a play, and I thought it was a performance. And they kept stopping and starting again and stopping and starting again. I thought that was the play. I thought it was brilliant. And I hung around for several years stage managing. I had vague acting aspirations, but once I saw how actors actually live, I gave that up and just hung around the Chino. And then I'd been writing poetry a lot, but like a lot of people in the 50s, I had, as I say, these vague artistic aspirations, nothing definite. I wanted to be an actor and a singer and a dancer and a juggler and everything, but I didn't know about playwriting. And because Joe Chino let people put plays on his floor, I eventually wound up writing plays.
I don't know why I come in here afternoons. All my underground theatrical friends come in at night. Oh, right. That's why I come in the afternoons. I hate bars. I get sexy in bars. At least I think so. Alcohol is otherwise a damned. Let's see. I could play a record, but after a while they all look alike. If I were bisexual, I could go out onto the street and buy sex. But look, it's raining.
Lance, when you came to the Chino, was that pretty much what happened to you, or how did you decide to take anything to the Chino, or how did the Chino really decide you that you should become a writer?
Another same story. I think we all had the same story. Came to New York, saw all the Broadway shows, was incredibly disappointed, and met a composer who said, "Have you ever done a musical? Joe wants a musical down to Cafe Chino." I didn't know what he was talking about. And I went down to the Cafe Chino to see what it was like, and they were doing a pirated version of Ionesco's The Lesson. First time I'd seen Ionesco, first time I'd seen The Lesson, and first theatrical experience I'd had in New York. It wasn't until around about 61, 62, something like that, when they started doing original plays. The first script I gave him was Home Free, and then I'd entered that in some contest, so they couldn't do it. And they ended up doing So Long at the Fair. Yes. And then Home Free and No Trespassing came afterwards.
It was when I was helping move scenery in for Lanford's first play at the Chino, So Long at the Fair, that for the first time I had an idea for a play. I was just doing things like that, stage managing and stuff for people, waiting tables. And I said, I write words, plays are words, I could write a play, and I went right home and wrote The Haunted Host. I went in with my play and said, "Hey, Joe, I wrote a play, let's put it on." And Joe, to show you how Joe actually felt about the whole thing, he said, "Oh, no, not another one." He said, "You don't want to be a playwright, Bob. Playwrights are terrible people. Look at all of them. Be a waiter. We need a good waiter."
I got mad tonight. I kicked over a little temple one of the fellows was making out of seashells in the sand. I said, you killed a man today, Buster. I saw you. You ran him through with your bayonet, and you kicked under a philodendron like my mother has back home. You can't kill a man in the morning and then spend the evening building little seashell temples in the sand.
Off-Broadway, which I suggest really began, or had its nucleus at the Chino, really began itself. In other words, it wasn't a group of college kids who came down they really began the off-Broadway ideas, but this was really theater germinating itself.
Yeah, we certainly didn't know we were doing it.
Yeah, right.
And it was a place to work, and it was a lot of fun, and we limited our plays to 2 or 3 characters because the stage wasn't any bigger than that.
At the cafe, we had chairs and tables. It was strictly a cafe in that sense that we served hot chocolate and we served hot coffee, hot tea. And you could drink this while you watched the play. Here, now, we don't have that at all. We have a much more, I wouldn't call it a formal setup, because all the theaters that we have are very flexible. You must remember that the first La Mama, 321 East 9th Street, had room for about 25 people. This included actors, audience, and who else would be there. As we moved, and this is our 6th home, the building that we're in now, each place got larger. And as the places got larger, the plays that the playwrights were writing changed to fit the space as we moved in.
What kind of experience did you have? Was it totally experimental on your part? I mean, since neither of you had had any theater experience before, try and describe a little bit of what happened as the play began to progress.
Well, with the first one is Neil DuBose Glenn DuBose, and we rehearsed in his living room, and so you're sitting around on sofas and things like that, and you're saying, "This isn't working. What should we do with that?" And I was there at all the rehearsals, and it was a very party kind of atmosphere. It wasn't like rehearsals came to be much later. It was just trying to get the right effect, trying to get the right thing. And he'd say, I hate that line. Why'd you write this line? I'd say, I don't remember. And he'd say, well, you better find out. And I'd go back and rewrite it, and we'd improvise little tiny things to get, it was a very
cooperative experience,
very
really, rather than a
experience,
supervised experience.
Not supervised at all. And I didn't know that a playwright couldn't talk directly to the actor.
We certainly were not a business because nobody had that in mind. And I would say then that we were a family, certainly very good friends, because the only reason that you would be involved in what is now called off-Broadway is because you loved it and because you were dedicated to the idea of doing theater the way we were trying to do it. And which was important because 90% of the world didn't at all think what we were doing was theater.
How long did you stay around the Chino, Bob?
I've never left, actually. I got myself very much involved in the running of the place because I love the place.
Right.
First of all, it was a wonderful place.
Yeah.
It was only incidentally a theater.
We were all very concerned with running out and getting the pastries and keeping them fresh. Of course, Joe was feeding us.
Sure.
That's how we, and we made about, I figured it up once, we made about $16 a week passing the hat.
Among us.
Oh.
Oh, yes, that was for everybody. I remember that.
But that fact that almost nobody around really thought of it as a theater. The theaters, the shows were like the party that one threw at this wonderful place called the Chino. Actually, it was sort of when Lanford started doing plays at the Chino,
Right.
and his plays started receiving all this sudden attention, that we all began to be aware that something theatrical, specifically theatrical, was happening.
Did that have anything to do with the Village Voice, with Michael Smith coming in and reviewing shows?
Yeah, probably it did. Long about it didn't happen until on the first 3 or 4, but it was like by the madness of Lady Bright. And when one newspaper reviewed them, then the others felt that they were being scooped, and so and the Post would pop up every now and again, and things like that. Yeah, Jerry Tolman.
I do respect the art of criticism. I think that it is an integral part of theater. There was always 1 or 2 persons who would come on occasion to see our plays. Very often, they could not write about it because a newspaper would not give them the paper space. I think we started in 61, and by 67, we were beginning to get a little criticism. But that was only after we had gone to Europe and returned.
And by the time Ellen started the La Mama,
right,
everybody was aware that we were doing theater.
Yeah, we were in theater by that time.
And so the La Mama started with slightly more, it was definitely for theater, and the coffee house aspect was secondary and supportive to the theater.
I'll say one thing for her. How long has it been he's been there?
Boy, it's 2 or 3 months now, nearly. Walks around the place whistling like he owned it.
Well, he earns his keep.
Boy. It's not in the kitchen that he earns his keep, Wilma. Boy.
Well, I'll say one thing.
I'm getting ready to close up now.
Whatever it is, she looks a darn sight better now than she did a year ago, since I can remember.
Boy.
I'm sorry.
I'm fixing to close up. You sleeping?
Thinking, I guess.
Have another cup of coffee. I got time.
That woman isn't responsible for her actions since her husband left her.
Swell.
It's not for us to judge.
Oh, well, that's all very well and good. But anybody who deliberately cuts herself off from everybody else in this town...
I don't judge, but I know who I speak to on the street and who I don't.
Is there work here in town, do you know?
Down in Eldridge? Not if you're looking for wages, not here.
It's easy to see the devil's work.
I had that in mind.
You might try Centerville. Eldridge is all but a ghost town.
You here alone?
I've managed for 7 years. It hasn't bothered me.
Might not be a bad idea to take on someone yourself.
It's a sin to sashay through Centerville the way she does, buying that boy suits and new clothes, keeping him up on the highway.
Well, I don't go. But I understand that she has made a regular showplace out of that cafe.
I'd be happier if it was me, if they made her close it down.
Well, it ought to be against the law. Serving beer to truck drivers and them having to be on the road so much.
The wages of sin lead to death.
Aren't you cold in just that jacket? That's pretty light for April.
No, it's not bad.
The wages of sin lead to death.
that's when we began really doing the work at the Cherry Lane. We had our Playwrights unit, but we also had the Cherry Lane, which at that time was an off-Broadway theater.
Yeah.
Now, question next is, when you moved, for instance, let's take Home Free. You did it at the Chino, because that's where I saw it.
Right.
And then we asked you if you would like to do it on the off-Broadway setup under what we considered miniature professional conditions. In other words, the Cherry Lane was run exactly as the Broadway theater was run, except in this case the playwright was the boss, not the divided authority. What happened to you, Lance, for instance, when we moved Home Free?
It was the first time we had opening night with critics actually there.
Yeah.
First time we'd been on anything like a double bill.
Yeah.
First time anyone had come down to interview me on the, for the New York Times or something. We were all frozen stiff.
First time anybody had done anything on a proscenium stage.
Yeah, never had done a thing on a proscenium stage
to me,
before.
the proscenium stage when I finally got on it was much more experimental than in the round.
A curtain. I couldn't believe it. This curtain opened up. I didn't know what to think.
And it covers everything. And that's rhyme.
It's just a frost. Is it a hoarfrost?
That's it. Hoarfrost is rhyme. And it covers everything. Every little blade of grass and every tree and houses and everything. Like it's been dipped in water and then in sugar.
Or salt. Hot tea.
Oh, it's better than ice storms or anything like that. And everything is white and sparkling, so clean. When the sun comes up, it nearly blinds you. And it's rare. It doesn't happen every year. And that's what I'd like to be. What I'd like to do. I have a book with a picture of Jack Frost painting rhyme on the window pane with a paintbrush. Do you fly? Do you dream you fly?
When?
Ever?
I guess I haven't thought about it.
How high? Now think about it. It's important. See, everybody flies. It's important how high.
As far as contemporary theater is concerned, how did that affect you in the sense of having an opening night? Let's take Home Free at the Cherry Lane. Of course, you didn't attend it, but the fact is, did that change in any way? Did it change your attitude about which was the freer area and where you thought you could eventually achieve your goal as a playwright? In other words, in relation to the constriction as opposed to the fact that you were moving into what I will have to call a more professional area.
I fled right back to the Cafe Chino.
You did?
I think, yeah. I fled right back down there. Well, suddenly there was an awful lot of publicity. I mean, there were 25 papers in town at the time, and all of these. And of course, they didn't know what was happening with those 3 plays.
When I did my first off-Broadway show, it was The Haunted Host. It was my first play that I wrote in 1964. Well, come 1969, somebody decided to do a commercial production of it. And I felt queasy about it anyway. And you'll like this story. And when it was done in 1969, all the critics said, well, he writes real well, but the play is just a copy of Boys in the Band.
Yeah.
Well, obviously that's 2 years after Boys in the Band had opened.
That's right.
But I had written the play 3 years before. So one found oneself coming out of off-Broadway, where one was known, where everybody knew all of one's work and the order in which one wrote it, into a world where these people didn't know it was a 5-year-old play they were seeing.
Right.
I was very badly burned and ran right back to places where I could put on plays the moment I wrote them and put them on exactly as I wanted to. And it wasn't, after that, it wasn't till Kennedy's Children, 5 years later, that I even let anyone option a play. I'd been so frightened by this, suddenly this great gamble where one night of a play and one's whole reputation is formed, by people who don't know that one has done maybe 80 other plays.
By 1962, people began saying the word student with fear. European visitors told us how students had always been a political force in Europe. But we were the first like that in America. I mean, we were something terrifically exciting and frightening. When the radical press got going, we started to have our own new symbolism and art and journalism for the very first time. We were, all the young, reaching out for each other through wild, crazy means like that.
You're talking about coming up against the realities of professional theater, and that in some ways is an euphemism for something that we had no chance to learn about off-Broadway, which was the realities of money.
Right.
Because off-Broadway, and I think a lot of people still don't know this or understand it, the difference between off-Broadway and off-Broadway was off-Broadway was no money.
That's
Zilch.
right. Yeah.
None.
Yeah.
All the plays I did at the Chino, the OR, the La Mama, were for no money. And scenery was stolen off the street, and the actors were all driving cabs or working as waiters in the daytime, and I was working in office jobs, typing autopsies for the city of New York. You know, and the moment I got into a professional production, I was delighted that there were people around to do things. But coming face to face with the fact that even if you had the best play in the world, it still had to draw 20,000 a week or it closed. That no matter how much one loved it, that sort of reality was a very stinging, frightening thing.
Lance, you did a show in the regional theater up at Buffalo, right, and Lemon Sky, and you went on to England, where finally Kennedy's Children was done, where it was very successful. Let's start, Lance, in relation to off-Broadway and in the off-Broadway situation. What happened to you in regards to going into the regional theater, which could be considered a transitional step to the Broadway, because then it was moved to Broadway?
It was. It was wonderful up there. And they had exactly the rhythms that I wanted in the play already, so I just sat there and watched. It worked out beautifully. I loved it up there. And they have a beautiful plant, gorgeous theater. I love it. And you're away, and you must have experienced the same thing. There aren't pressures on you, and, you know, you can wander around and see Buffalo and at Louis Sullivan Building, and it's all very terrific. Then
what happened?
Then the Broadway producer starts saying, well, now, you know, this is going to be the billing, and so I could care less about billing. We're going to give you this much, and we have to have, you know, the set has to be, you know, brought in for so much, and this is the theater that you're going into. And I go in, I look at the theater, and I hate it. I just hate it. There was this threat of, you want it done, you want it to be seen, and unless you agree to our terms, we'll not do it. And by the end, I really believed that.
Bob, what happened to you? Was the next big step the English production of Kennedy's Children?
When I went to England, my main shock was Kennedy's Children was done over there in the back room of a bar, much as I was doing plays here. What I wasn't prepared for was the fact that, having lived in America where any sort of artist, and especially theater artists, are treated like freaks, that I was going to be treated as a mature, responsible, professional human being whose work was of importance to the world, and that even if I was doing my play in the back room of a bar, that it was going to be subjected to the same amount of attention and scrutinized by the same standards as any West End play. And for the first time in my poor little American life, I felt like a human being. And I began to make some demands on myself as an artist and as a person.
As the money possibility changed your attitudes about writing, about what you're really writing?
This one group of people came to me and wanted me to write pilot films for a new Lassie series. You know, well, I wouldn't be interested in that under any circumstances. I'd giggle. I mean, I'd love to make all that money, but I would giggle. I know I'd start laughing, and I'd write things that couldn't possibly be used. And, you know, or some people wanted to make a movie of Kennedy's Children if I give all the people happier endings. Well, I can't, you know. And sometimes I wish I could, because there again, it's tons of lovely money, and money is very nice to have, especially when you haven't had any for a long time.
Exactly.
But
think of all you could do with
if other people are telling you what to do, it's no different than those jobs I used to have where I would type autopsies.
Well, that gets into the economics. Let's get into the aesthetics. There were two things that interested me in both of your plays. For instance, yours, Bob, Kennedy's Children, you have 5 or 6 people on stage. Essentially, they are monologues. Essentially, the people talk to the audience. They do not look at each other. They do not talk to each other. They have no relationship. There is an empathy in their stories, but not in their relationships to each other, except for the metaphor that they are all Kennedy's children, a result of the conditions that existed in the 50s or the 60s.
Dear Buddha, the Kong I killed today had in his pockets, which I searched for nothing must be wasted, right? The man I killed today had in his pockets a tiny little red lacquered capsule looking like a shotgun cartridge from my country, Buddha. And in it, what do you think he had? You whom they call the all-knowing one. What do you think he had in his pockets, Buddha?
Lance, when you did Rill and later on when we did Reimers of Eldridge, you did something else. You had all of your people on stage all of the time. They did not come on and off.
With mine, it evolved right through, right at the Chino with a minimal set, because we couldn't possibly do an entire town. I want to expand beyond just this one living room. I wanted to create that entire town that would be involved, for instance, in the Reimers trial.
You, on the other hand, took a whole generation of people and you put them in a very realistic bar where we're sitting now, which is Phoebe's. You told the story of a generation that people did not relate to each other. Where did it come from?
Well, it came, one, from the habit of writing any way that I wanted to from off-Broadway. With Kennedy's Children specifically, I was fascinated by the image here in this bar, Phoebe's, in the afternoons of people sitting far apart from one another. It haunted me. I would see friends of mine sitting far apart, muttering to themselves, and I simply became obsessed with what was it they were muttering. I just wanted to bring the words up. And the longer it goes on, and the more that their stories become alike, and the more each of them approaches in their own memories of the 60s, the moment when their hero died, and with it their quest for something better.
All-seeing, all-forgiving, omnipotent, omniscient Buddha. Which I should have known, which I should have seen. But in order to find out which, I had to propel a ragged atom of burning metal into his irreplaceable heart and kill him and loot his body. Buddha. Must men die so that other men can see that all men are truly the same? Must each man kill a man before he can see that other men are just men like him and nobody must kill? Wasn't Christ enough? Huh? If everybody has to kill a man before he can see that all men are one, well, then all men will be one, because there will only be one man left. And then will that man be truly saved? Do we, for God's sake, all have to be tortured and robbed and die, so that one last man can finally be saved?
Remember now, it's the top of the seventh, nobody's even reached base yet. You're pitching better than any time this year. You're better than any pitcher on any team the whole year. The fire's coming back too. Yeah, the perfect eye, the control, the confidence. Knock this one off, you'll be right back in the razor blade league. $50,000 buyouts from Schaefer or Gillette's new foamy. Don't lose your grip and you're in. Look at that. Bizzuto's up there. Yeah, he's jacking up enthusiasm. He's putting me down like a bandit. Holy cow! Duke Frankowski's got himself in a little Pollock jam, folks. Why, he's pitched 5 straight sliders. It looks like he's lost his toe hole. The string has run out. Lost his toe hole. String has run out. You know, baseball talk will turn your brain to meatloaf. Bunt. What the hell does bunt mean? Jesus, will you look at this team? I never felt so insecure in my life. Well, if it hadn't been for those back-to-back homers by Bruno and Popeye in the second, I'd be in the toilet already. I can't believe it. Not like my coconut buddy there at third. Look at him. You look at him. All he does is flash his gums and say, "I'm not Spanish, I'm Cuban." Look at him. Will you look at him? Look at me. Yeah, I went after a Nazi grounder like a fag was after my boy Mitch. Could have dislocated my shoulder. This is a dopey game. Well, you know there's no strategy in baseball? You know what the strategy there is in baseball? If you got a right-handed pitcher, you put up a left-handed batter. If you got a left-handed pitcher, you put up a right-handed batter. That's it. That's all the strategy there is. Boy, I tell you, I used to be so excited about all this, you know. I'm not anymore. No, I mean, I'm excited, sure, but I'm also bored. I'm bored with the excitement. Hey, when I first came up, you know what I was doing? Going to this game and everything, and I could lick anyone. Now, it's just bases, changing clothes, fake dirt, 20,000 paid and furious fans dying for me to fail. I just haven't got the confidence to know what to do next.
Contemporary theater in America. Broadway, off-Broadway, off-Broadway, regional theater. What is it, and where is it going? Richard Barr, theatrical producer, helps to answer these questions by engaging in dialogue with those who literally create the contemporary theater, the playwrights. Mr. Barr has produced many Broadway plays by established writers such as Edward Albee, as well as by emerging playwrights whose experimental works he's produced off-Broadway. In this program, Mr. Barr meets with playwright Jonathan Reynolds at the American Place Theater in Manhattan, a nonprofit theater dedicated to the search for new writers who can expand the limits of contemporary drama. Mr. Reynolds, the playwright, began his career in the theater as an actor, first in college in Ohio, then in summer stock, and finally as an understudy on Broadway in the successful play Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. He is the author of the hit play Yanks 3, Detroit 0, Top of the Seventh, that premiered at the American Place Theater. Mr. Barr sets the stage for his conversation with Jonathan Reynolds by discussing the state of contemporary theater and explaining how Mr. Reynolds and his work contributed to its growth.
We have chosen the American Place Theater, where we're sitting now in this marvelous small house that they have here at 6th Avenue and 46th Street. Their complete concentration is on new playwrights, which is a marvelous thing that they do here. They read approximately 1,000 plays a year, and I believe Julia Miles will tell you more about that.
We, of course, receive many scripts, some of them through playwrights we know who just know about us and send them to us, some of them through agents. We, after all, have been in operation for 13 years, and we have an excellent reputation, which I think we deserve, and people do seek us out and send us their new playwrights. The scripts come in, and of course they are logged in, and we have a reading staff, 2 literary advisors, who get that. First they come in and Wynn has a look at them and decides who he thinks would be best to read them. They are then read and reported on, and careful attention is paid to them. They come back to Wynn's desk, and he goes over the reports and decides whether or not there should be further work done. Sometimes in the way we will just have an informal reading of the work. Sometimes we will have a cast. We will get together a director and a cast and have what we call work in progress, which can be anywhere from 3 or 4 days to a week to 3 or maybe even 4 weeks of work on a script. When sometimes I read some of the scripts which he is interested in, so that obviously I can have an opinion. And, you know, we seek the best plays, and Wynne really makes that decision on his knowledge of what is good playwriting.
The thing that there is exciting about the American Place Theater is that they have continued to present new playwrights over the last many years, and they have succeeded in discovering quite a few, one of whom we're going to talk to today, Jonathan Reynolds. But as you can see, we have this is a stage, as opposed to, let us say, the Cafe Chino, which is where Off-Broadway began. This is essentially, this would be called Off-Broadway, and the difference is very simple. The Off-Broadway is far more improvisational. The Off-Broadway is essentially a miniature version of a regular uptown Broadway production. It just happens to be done in a smaller theater, and usually with lesser-known people, though not so much anymore. That's been changing, too. A lot of our stars and our finest actors and actresses have come down to work off-Broadway because they want to. Now, in the emerging playwright, what kinds of plays are occurring? What is happening? It's a very difficult thing to generalize. It's probably an incorrect one. However, if you read as many plays as the American Place people read and as I read, obviously certain trends or certain types of plays seem to be more in evidence than others. I have, over the past 10 years, read over 1,000 plays a year without any question, and there are about 3 categories that I see. Now, this is not an absolute rule, that plays fall into. Writers are now writing, they're using myth a great deal. They are discussing, they're writing about illusion, the illusion of the reality that we have as we live and as we move through the world, and they are satirizing the society and the present system. The myth is used, I believe, as a substitute for a hero. We don't have the Greek kings anymore. There are no more Agamemnons. There are no more Oedipuses. And our writers obviously have no present kings or major heroes that they can write about. So they have to dig back into myth and create a fictional hero in some cases. In others, like the one we're going to see today, Jonathan Reynolds' play, The Top of the Seventh, the hero is a pitcher, a baseball pitcher. And he is not any real one. No one is referred to, but it is the figure of a baseball pitcher who's on the slide.
Oh, God, my whole life is like this. Just as I start going up the corporate ladder, wham, the pressure hits me. Rizzuto starts watching me up there. I can feel his eyes in the front of my face. I can feel the camera cutting to my right cheek, cutting to my left cheek. And there's a close-up of the sweat on my forehead. That damn camera, it sees everything. My arm, my lack of concentration. I'm always on the spot. I freeze at the pinnacle. I'm afraid of success. That's it.
Form that the various plays have taken, I've termed abstract realism, for want of a better word. Most of the playwrights are not very much concerned with setting. They don't care very much about a reality on stage, leaving that to television and motion pictures. But what they are concerned about is projecting their own ideas in an abstract fashion with a realistic background of story, not necessarily a realistic setting. Take the one that we're going to see of Jonathan Reynolds' play now, The Top of the Seventh. The fact is that this is a pitcher, and all you see is the pitcher on the mound, and he, as you will see in the piece, recounts part of his life's history. But it is a completely abstract setup, and it is completely realistic in the sense not only what he says, but in the relationships he has to the people on stage. Jonathan, we talked to Lanford Wilson and Bob Patrick. We sat at Phoebe's and asked them specifically how they began. They explained, of course, that they started the Cafe Chino, which is off-Broadway. Now we're beginning to explore the emerging playwrights in off-Broadway, and I wondered if you'd tell us anything or something about how you began at the American Place Theater, which I believe was the spot in which your plays were first produced.
the plays actually did come, Yanks, the baseball play, was finished first, and that came through a friend to the American Place Theater, an actor who'd worked here. And Win Hanman, the head of the theater, read it and said, yes, we want to do this. Have you got anything to go with it or not? And I said, no. And he said, well, then we'll put something else with it by another author. And I said, no, don't do that. I'll write something.
Most of the plays are unsolicited. They come in various ways. Agents, the writer sends them, friends of the writer send them. That's the way they come in. And by the way, with the coming in of plays, with Reynolds' play, it was sent to us by an actor who had acted here, who loves this theater, who was a friend of Jonathan Reynolds and knew he had this play, and he just dropped it off one day. And there it was in the pile with hundreds of others. But when they're really good, they jump out at you. One has a Geiger counter which goes boom, boom, boom when you feel that talent. So all you had to do was read 5 pages of Reynolds and you say, hey, the Geiger counter's going. There's something here.
What about college? Did anything happen there in relation to the theater which encouraged you to become a playwright?
Not much as a writer.
That's
No,
what
I really had decided at about the age of 14 that for whatever reason, demanded reason at the time, that I wanted to be an actor.
Right.
And pursued that like crazy. And went to college and took all endless acting courses. It was in every play that they produced. Was in summer stock for 5 years. Went to London, studied in London for a couple of years. Oh, the idea of being an actor, and already had a vast number of roles that I'd played by the time that I got to New York. I mean, I had played all sorts of Shakespearean roles in musical comedy and situation comedy, such as it was then, 10 or 15 years ago, and all kinds of theatrical roles, you know, really through the history of the theater. And when I got to New York, I was really pretty disappointed with what I ran into as an actor. And I did some work for Joe Papp in the Park, which I liked, and then got into Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead when that was here, which is now 67.
Yeah, about that, I would say.
Then just soured on the whole thing. I thought, if I don't like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead being in it, which at that time I thought was a terrific show, I'm certainly not going to like the rest of this stuff. So I took off, and I had a contract to go to the Guthrie, be in that company there. Yeah. Some nice roles, and just decided I don't want to do this anymore. And I went out and I went to work for Senator McCarthy in 1968 for about 6 months. I went all around the country for him, 6 or 9 months, and did a lot of political work. And then came back at the end of those campaigns, and there was all that stuff in Chicago, you know, when there was all those riots in Chicago,
that's right,
tempestuous stuff there. And I just lost any interest in the theater or in film or in anything kind of creative like that, and I was quite interested in news and current events and so on. And when I came back to New York, because I've always lived in New York, I thought what I wanted to do was to get involved in television in a sort of non-fiction way. And through a series of friends that I happened to know and a great deal of luck, got to a job with David Frost, who was then doing an interview program, and then Dick Cavett for about 1.5 years, and left that and started to write a movie. And it was actually out of the very depressing experience that I had writing this movie, which was very unsuccessful and didn't sell, in fact, that I started to write on the side Yanks, and didn't really ever think of it as ever being produced. I just thought, here's something that if I, in some insane way, this ever happened, this is what I'd really like to see on a stage. Somebody performing a really difficult feat. A perspective is something that everyone knows, which is a baseball player, because they've seen it either in the flesh at a stadium with it miles away from the spectator, or on television. But you've never seen, there's never been a baseball pitcher actually throwing a ball on the stage. Right. And I had always felt that I knew what baseball players were going through, and it wasn't calm at all. It was complete panic, depending upon what their situation in life was. And it occurred to me as I was writing it, then it became clear what I was writing about, and about failure, and about people who have a great deal of talent, and for some unknown reason just talk themselves right out of it. I mean, this is a game about a person who's perfectly capable of pitching a no-hitter, or at least winning a game, and what he does really is just to say, I can't do it, and therefore I won't, and he delivers on his prophecy. It's self-fulfilling. He blows it. Right. And at that point in my life, there were some of the things that I was going through.
67 was sure a good year. The fastball had zipped, the curve had rotation. I got the loan for the fast food franchise. Jeannie's breasted and sacked. Everyone knew my name, even at away games. I could have been dating Mamie Van Doren in 67. Concentrate! Concentrate! Oh, my God! A wild pitch. Christ, nothing looks as bad as a wild pitch. That's okay, it's all right, it's all right. Come on, you're a veteran, you got 14 years experience under your belt. You've been in situations like this dozens of times, dozens. Yeah, but what did I do to get out of it? I forget, my memory's gone. Wiped out like the crease in my gray double knit.
Wait a minute. What do I care?
This is the New York Yankees. This is the Big Apple. As the Yanks go, so goes New York. And as goes New York, so goes the world. Everybody knows that.
Wait a minute, is that still right?
Breathe.
At the time, I was upset that I had ever been an actor, but in retrospect, not at all.
Well,
I mean,
it
I
should
think
be an
this is
enormous
valuable.
help because as we were talking among ourselves, the dialogue that you write is so completely convincing and so sayable. A lot of people can write for the stage, except they can't write for actors. And it makes it very,
Well, I must
very
say,
difficult.
when I do write, it's always with the actor in mind, delivering it and what it will sound like, and so that the build is right, and the actor can also have a good time with it.
This kind of a play, which is an hour and 5 minutes practically of monologue, I approached the play by no approach, which was an approach of allowing my mind and imagination to run wild and make the lines, rather than set myself into what the play should be about, just let my imagination go and search and plow the ground and plow the play itself and experiment that way. In this particular monologue, the man reflects, and then he reflects upon reflecting, and then he hears himself talk. He deals with the audience in reality. He deals with tremendous amount, all our own fears, emotions, all our feelings. So to me, the way to approach the part was obvious, and all I had to do is do it.
Who's this? Who's this?
Number 41, second baseman, Lucky Johnson.
How do you like that? A wasp. What can you say bad about a wasp? They're all perfect. They own all the banks. They don't have to take life seriously. They could be dull. Nobody cares. They're so much better than other folks. You know, they're leaner, tighter, sharper around the edges. You know. I'm not a wasp. I'm Polak. That's right. Not a Pole, not Polish. A Polak. I get very suspicious when people call me Polish. Because inside I know they're thinking starch bowling shirt. 6 to turn the ladder. Tell you, the main advantage they got is there are so many of them. All those southern sheriffs, all those Midwestern governors. I can't fight that. I'm fed up with this. I want to take a shower. I'm going to let him hit it. That's right. I'm going to give up my perfect game and my no-hitter. I'm just going to get the hell out of here. It's all out of my hands anyway. Right, I'm going to give up my razor blade commercials, my whole economic future. I'm going to let Lucky Johnson hit the next one as far as he can make it go. Wasps are the chosen people anyway. They should be allowed certain graces in times of stress. Okay, let's be lucky, baby. I'm going to put it right down the alley where you can't miss it. And I'm going to make it a medium fast one, which is the only kind of fast one I can throw anyway. Okay, here goes Lucky Johnson. That was the fattest pitch I have ever thrown anyone. Right down the alley. He missed it. Oh, my God, I'm a goddamn genius. I could get away with that kind of stuff. I got it knocked. I could put a new wing on the house. I could even give Jeannie a bauble of some kind. Let's go, baby. He's no better than me. That's all the charity you get, you pasty-faced bigot. Woo-hoo! I'm hot today. Throw me the ball. Throw me the ball. Oh, the golden wasp. He must have been drooling for my slider. Must have been drooling for it. Well, this time he's going to get it. Here we go. Lucky Johnson. Outside and low. That's it. Little nubber on the ground. Come on, scoop it up, baby. Fire it right on target. Perfect strike. Easy out. Safe. Save. Save? Why, you stupid Camacho. You pulled him off the bag. I don't believe it. I don't believe it! God damn it! You come over here. You make us advertise all our beer in Spanish. You paint all your walls green. You get us addicted to plantains. Now you and your neon gums ruin my perfect game? I get you for that, gummo!
Jonathan, what happened after the American Place Theater took your play? Was there a great deal of rewriting? Were there steps to be gone through prior to its eventual arrival on stage directed by Alan Arkin?
Yeah, it was interesting because the first Yanks seemed to be in fairly good shape at the time, and Rubbers, Alan Arkin thought, this is good and it's funny and all that, and so it was a real challenge to him. There's something perverse in my nature that said we have to make a director really crazy now that I've already made an actor crazy. And he was constantly encouraging me to rewrite Rubbers and saying, here's a section that doesn't work and there's too much talking here and we know too much about her and it's not that kind of play. We don't need to know that much about her, oddly enough. So we were cutting things right and left and so on and leaving Yanks alone entirely.
And sometimes as a first step, we'll just bring in excellent actors and just say, you're not rehearsing, just present it, give it, go all out, and let's hear the play. And the writer can then go home and work. Other times sometimes after that, we'll do 3 or 4 weeks' work. And sometimes the scripts remain in hand because rather large revisions have to be made. And the main thing here is always the writer. The writer should have the freedom to revise. Other times, we realize the writer's gone pretty far, and we say, all right, let's memorize it and put it on. And we even the space, whether it's put on in our basement rehearsal space or in the theater, depends upon the needs of the play.
And just before it opened, and we had the preview audience, and Rubber seemed to be in pretty good shape, we all kind of sat back and thought, hey, Yanks is about 10 minutes too long, and nobody paid any attention. And then we furiously tried to cut that, and an interesting thing is that Tony didn't want it to be cut at all. Tony was playing the picture, said, no, because they won't understand this. And
this play was so close to me, so close to, I felt that I understood it completely, that questions never came into my mind to ask. When I ran into a problem, as I said to Alan, I said, let me go for a week or two, just turning the play over. If I run into a problem, I'll ask.
Right.
Well, if you see me going awry anyway, you come and tell me what you have in mind.
Directors are cast, in many cases, much like actors. You feel a compatibility, quality, based on your knowledge of the person or previous work. You feel a propensity for the material. You feel the kind of imagination that would work with the material, and you feel a specific tuning in on the wavelength of the writer. So that's what you look for. In the case of Alan Arkin, Reynolds' plays required someone with a really excellent sense of humor, a wild imagination, the ability to just boldly take off and go to the limits of comedy. And Alan Arkin was a natural. Both Reynolds and I agreed on that.
I remember when we were into 2 weeks of rehearsal, Alan came to me and said, well, you've tried this play 15 times, 15 different interpretations of it. He says, they're all wonderful. You pick out any one you want and let's do it. We're ready to open.
And how about other works? Are you working on something? Are you going to continue in the theater, or are you going to jump around into pictures, television, or what?
I actually did just finish a screenplay.
Well, that's all right.
I think it'll be more successful than the one that inspired the Yanks, or led to it anyway. But I also did, as a result of these, I got a Rockefeller grant from this theater, through this theater, so I am working on a play which will not necessarily be done here. There's no obligation for them to do it, but I am working here with that now.
Very, very good.
Most of the time, and traditionally in the theater, and certainly in the commercial theater, the plays are chosen a good deal with the audience in mind, and one can well understand that. One would say, well, are there people who want to see this? Will it be popular? Will they come and enjoy themselves? And it's a very valid question, especially a valid question if you're producing commercial theater where people have to line up at the box office and buy tickets. However, at the American Place Theater, where you say what you're dedicated to is to put on the best possible plays, the voices worth hearing on the stage, you then occasionally get plays that you say, well, I know there may not be a large audience for this, and it may not be popular right now, But it would be very wasteful if this play weren't done, because this is a play of real talent, and it's moving into the future, and somebody has to do it, and somebody has to be there to do those plays.
The audience continues to be small and special, and they have to be educated, which we certainly try to do. They have to be found, they have to be exposed to these plays, and they have to open up their heads to them.
If we were running a commercial theater, we would have to think about audience and reviews. We have to understand that reviews do not necessarily reflect the highest quality. The reviewers are guiding masses of people. They're like consumer guides to entertainment.
I think we're one of the first, perhaps the first, but one of the first theaters to do this, to have a period of time where the critics would come like 3 or 4 days, and then they would hold their review all for the same day. And to have the critics come, not opening night when the play is first exposed or first shown to a public, but to give the play every possible chance by having it run before our subscription audiences for a week, perhaps even 2 weeks. Then the press is invited in, and they come and review the play. And it works very well for us, and it has worked. A lot of people have picked this up and are doing it now. It's just to give the play, these new forms, these new writers, every possible chance to have a play that's been shown before audiences. We can have this kind of work in this kind of laboratory because we've been in a time when we've had support from foundations who have been supporting the arts, and of course from the government who has come into supporting the arts. And this has, you know, given us some time to do this new thing which we're trying to do, which is bring new playwrights to the public.
Look, suppose your career is over. What are you going to do? I don't know. Breathe, breathe, breathe. I'm going to lose Donna Luna Donna, that's for sure. She's outside my 66 Lincoln listening to the game on the radio and protecting my hubcaps from the Cuban's cousin. She's my Texas groupie. I think about her all the time. Boy. What I like best about her is her body. What she likes best about me is that I'm famous. Concentrate, concentrate. Back to business, back to business. All right, who's this? Who's this?
Number 22, the left fielder, Lincoln Lewis.
Wait a minute. This guy's one of my strikeouts. That's right. All right. Let's see now. Don't pitch him low and outside. Don't pitch him low and inside. All right. Don't pitch him high and outside. Don't pitch him high and inside. Where the hell did I pitch this guy? On the hands, across the letters, with my eyes closed? I forget.
You're through. 2-0, Gronkowski. Can't even find the box. You're undisciplined, scatterbrained, inarticulate.
What's he saying?
You got on base and a gift, you know.
That son of a bitch don't bother me. I would have think I almost gave him a hit. Sure wish I could think of something mean to say to a wasp. All you can do is insult their taste and hope for the best.
The Kingston Trio's never getting back together again. Thanksgiving is boring.
stop pushing me around. I didn't run away, I just knocked him down. So if you're thinking of fighting, you better think twice. The new gang in town can be colder than ice. We don't do the
Contemporary theater in America. Broadway, off-Broadway, off-Broadway, regional theater. What is it, and where is it going? Richard Barr, theatrical producer, helps to answer these questions by engaging in dialogue with those who literally create the contemporary theater, the playwrights. Mr. Barr has produced many successful Broadway plays by established writers, including Edward Albee, as well as experimental works by emerging playwrights, whose works he has produced off-Broadway. In this program, Mr. Barr speaks with Peter Kopany, a playwright best known for street theater, plays performed without charge on the street, reaching many who never saw a Broadway show. His plays deal positively with life and love. They are anti-drug. They are usually designed to ease racial tension, and they are based on first-hand experiences. The New York Times has called Peter Kopany the leading playwright dealing with the streets, while Newsweek wrote that Mr. Kopany has absolute wisdom about urban realities.
Today we are sitting in the middle of Greenwich Village, right near Sheridan Square and about a block from the Cafe Chino, or what used to be the Cafe Chino, where you remember Lanford Wilson and Robert Patrick said they first started writing in the theater. Now today we're going to have a very different kind of theater. We're going to introduce you to Peter Kopany. And Peter Kopany will explain to you why he writes the way he does and how he began writing, but the interesting part of it is that the playwrights that we've already met all began in a completely different fashion.
I started writing a long time ago when I was a youngster. I started writing, even though I didn't always put it down on paper. I knew I was a writer. I would just sing my feelings out. And I started writing plays, I think, like in 67 or 66, something like that. You read my first play.
The first play, I know
right?
that, yeah.
And you were very encouraging, and it was wonderful. I mean, you were wonderful to me.
Thank you, Peter.
You know, you really were.
Didn't produce it, though, did I?
No, you didn't produce it, and I don't think I resent you for that, but the thing that you did was that you encouraged me to write. And then finally, when I was writing, never really knowing I was a writer all along, you knew more than I did about me that I was a writer, so that when I was doing it, I started to really enjoy my life.
What was actually the first play that you had produced? I know that I read your other first play written, but what was the first play that you had produced?
The first show was Bliss or a Psychobedelic Attack. It was the first show I wrote. Everything I've written has been produced except for 2 one-acts.
Well, that's pretty good. That's nice. A pretty good record. Yeah. And where was that? Was that off, wasn't it?
It was off Broadway,
downtown.
Right, yeah. Over on the Lower East Side.
What actually moved you from what we would call proscenium theater, such as it was on East 54th Street and downtown off Broadway, into what is termed street theater?
Well, I think I was looking for a bit of a new way to express myself, or something that had a little bit more meaning to me outside of sitting home and having a wonderful fantasy and writing and having kind of a lonely, typical writer's life. And I'm the kind of person who's led by adventure and excitement. And I wanted to get out there and deal with people.
And what was the actual process of developing street theater? Did you write the words first, or did you visit the people? Did you take the people's ideas, the people's feelings, or did you actually start writing a play about street theater?
Well, when I went into a community, I would select the community I would go into in a way like in Park Slope.
Right,
I followed the news about it, in articles about Italians and Puerto Ricans, and they were rioting, and all little incidences that happened along the way. And
where is Park Slope?
It's in South Brooklyn.
South Brooklyn, right, okay.
And then it just interested me enough to go to the community, and I just happened to know someone who had a community center there, and I asked him if I could go in and work. And I had 23 teenagers, and what I was looking for, see, it's not so much that I went into the community as a writer. I went in to learn a little bit more about me, because I knew that something about prejudice intrigued me, and there was something in me somewhere, and it wasn't until I was there and working in that community that I realized that I was there to discover things about myself and my own feelings. And in doing so, I learned about other people and their feelings, and I put them into a show.
Now, I went over your cards last night. I got a pretty good idea of what you wanted the show to be about. Most of you put down prejudice and racial riots. Is there anybody here who hasn't felt prejudice at one time or another? Where does prejudice come from? How do you experience it? Well, how do we know it's there? Now look, you put prejudice and racial riots down on your card, so you must be affected by it somehow. Where does prejudice come from?
Well, sometimes it gets passed on through our parents. Like when I was walking with my mother and she'd say, look at all those Puerto Ricans. Only she wouldn't say Puerto Ricans, she'd say Spicks.
Hey, man.
Hey, I'm talking about my mother. She'd say, look at all them Spicks. All they ever do is drink Rheingold beer and collect welfare.
Yeah, I think it comes from our parents' attitudes in a lot of little ways.
Hey, it's not only our parents, it's the way it is.
Sergio asks the question, does anybody in this room, does anybody here not have an experience about prejudice? Have we never experienced prejudice? And the kids are very hesitant and reluctant to reply to this question. And this is a question that we throw out to the audience as well. Prejudice is something that the play deals with. Life, we deal with it in life, in daily life. That is Peter Capani's message. It deals with prejudice. And very often in rehearsals we would deal with the question of prejudice in our own personal lives, and the script very often grew out of personal experiences. And there's incidences in this play which happened because of true experiences that happened to the actors.
Sometimes I think I'm not too sure really what prejudice is, except that there's anger behind it. And prejudice is kind of a mysterious word or a label that we put on a lot of things. I mean, you know, prejudice isn't one thing. It's a lot of things. And I think in terms of the press, when I would follow situations or incidences like Washington Square Park, where it was such blown out of proportion to become a racial incident, when there were so many other elements that were involved. And I think the racial thing is perpetrated by the press. I think that things like the press not really, I mean, to me the press is something that is also not only an organization which collects news, but it's also, like theater and other things, a way of people getting underneath the situation. And I think the press has a tendency to look for what would be flashy or to make headlines and make something become racial. In other words, if you see a little story in the newspaper and like surrounding Washington Square Park and someone says Gambinos and they're Italians attacking blacks, now if you're outside of this community and you read that newspaper, like I did with Park Slope stuff, I started thinking, wow, there's a racial war going on, you know? And people start getting tense. So anytime there's any little incident involving blacks or Italians or any other ethnic group, it becomes out of proportion. You start labeling it as racial prejudice being involved, when I think maybe there's a small fraction of the incidences that are really racially involved. I mean, let's face it, it has to come back to our emotional structure.
Everybody shut up! Now, I want to know what's going on here. Just tell me, is it a racial thing? Hey, look, if you can't deal with what's going on in this room, how are you ever going to deal with what's going on out in the world? Well, don't you care?
No. We don't care, okay?
You don't care? You don't care? Well, I do care. All right? I come down here because I care about you people. And now you tell me that you don't care. Well, you better start caring. Look at this place. You almost started another riot out there. All they have to see is an Italian, a black, and a Puerto Rican fighting, and everybody would have jumped in and there would have been a free-for-all. And especially you people should know how hot this neighborhood is. And I'm not just talking to Gina and Anita, but to everybody.
I didn't do nothing. I'm the one who told you what was going on.
And you mean to tell me you're going to sit here and not try to find out why this happened? Well, if you don't care enough about yourselves to care, then why should I care? Why should anybody care?
The kind of street theater that this show is about and deals with is a specific street theater which involves the community in acting out their own feelings. So in other words, the show is evolved that it's written around them and it's the people in the community involved in it. The New York City street show is about those various situations and about the people and the personalities and the incidences which happened during rehearsals of those particular situations.
But it was actually, this is based, the New York City street show is based on the Washington Square riots. Is that not true?
It's
to
based,
an extent.
Well, you see, it's not based on the Washington Square riot, and it's really not based on the riots in Park Slope, but it's based on the feelings surrounding those situations, impressions.
Impressions of the
feelings. Like if I were to write something about you, and I would just met you or were just talking to you, I would just go by the vibrations that I picked up from you and maybe little things that you might say.
Right, and then what did you do after that? In other words, once you had felt the impression and had actually put something on paper, then did you go back to the people to try and get them to dramatize this, or what?
Yes, I usually did it in song, because I felt that it was, well, like in my own life, I wanted music, and it was more exciting, and I thought that it would reach people better. So if I did it in a song, it was easier to teach, and it was easier for young people or untrained people to learn a song.
Did you write the music and the lyrics at that time, or did you
I collaborated on the music.
Right.
I'm not a trained musician.
No, I know that, yeah.
But lyrics do come to me in song. Like I will sing my lyrics rather than sitting at a typewriter and writing them out. I would sing them and tape them and then type it out and clean it up and have an idea of what's going to result. I guess maybe in a way I might be a little bit selfish. It's the reason I write musicals is because as a playwright, if I have to sit out there and watch all these rehearsals over and over, like when I was writing dramas in the beginning, which I first started writing, I would sit there and go, this is getting boring, you know? And I really would like to have a little music in my life, and if I have to sit here, I might as well have some music, and if you're going to watch something, you want to have humor in it, so that you can enjoy yourself. And as a playwright, I want to enjoy myself, and hopefully if I do, the audience will.
Who can say I've never felt lonely, or have never been confused? Who can say I've never felt pain, or have never been abused? And worries all through the night.
Dad's still nervous from the war,
And when they look at me, they wonder what they did it all for. Never felt lonely, or have never been confused. Who can say I've never felt pain, or have never been abused?
they've been through what I'm now going through.
What do they know any more than before?
Is there
anyone at all?
Is it true that some of the people that are playing this are actually or were actually in the situation in Washington Square or are members of this community?
This time, I'm using actors to play street people.
What is the difference between an actor playing a street person and a street person playing a street person?
Well, there's a variation in the quality of the performance because when you're working with a professional, they're more able to portray, you know, other people and feelings, and they know more what they're doing. The important thing when you're using it with a street person is their personal growth, because I'm not just a playwright, I'm interested in people and growth.
Now look, you don't know if you have talent until you do something. Just because you see somebody on TV or hear them sing a song on the radio doesn't mean that they have talent and you don't.
Yes, it does.
When we say someone is talented, do we mean that they have perfect vocal cords? No. I don't think so. So what makes someone like Dylan so special? Honesty and guts. He has the guts to get up in front of people and say exactly what he feels. And that's what I'm here to help you people do.
Yeah, but I still get nervous.
That's natural.
Yeah, but I'm scared of getting in front of people.
Hey, man, you mean we're going to do this in front of people? Sure, it's a street show. What do you think we're doing it all for? I don't understand why the big surprise. You people knew it. Everything in New York City is a street show. There are a million shows happening every day, and you're part of that show just by being present. So now you're feeling a little bit insecure, but don't worry. We have a lot of work to do before we're ready to perform anything. Don't let the audience frighten you. They want to like you, because if they do, then they'll have fun. So just enjoy what you're doing.
It's a fascinating combination. It's a little more formal than one would suspect the name street theater would indicate, and on the other hand, it still comes and stems from the emotions and the people of the street.
We've retained the vitality, we've retained the energy, we've retained the highly motivated choreography and movement and blocking and just feelings that the kids feel on the stage. And that's where street theater is at. We saw hundreds of actors for the roles in this play. There are 12 roles in the play. We saw over 300 people for these roles. We cast actors who were not only good actors and singers and dancers, trained in all three categories, but we also chose people who were able to relate to the material, people who were able to feel something about what Peter was writing about. This was very important to the success of the play. We also found that the actors' personalities paralleled in many ways, even more so than we originally thought when we cast them, the actors who they were portraying in the play. There were incidences during rehearsals, and there were incidences outside of the rehearsal process out in the street that related almost verbatim to experiences that we were feeling here at the at rehearsals, or lines that were said during the play. They were actually role-playing the parts that they play on stage, off stage. And this became more apparent as rehearsals went by.
If I hear someone, when we're in rehearsal, like for this show, someone says something that's particularly personal about themselves or revealing more than personal about themselves, and I find that when I incorporate those things into a show, the performer, whether he be a trained performer or a street person, can relate to that character more and start saying, well, it's more like me than me going out trying to create some outside person that I don't relate to.
That's very interesting. Peter, there seems to be an underlying religious theme in most of your work. Would you care to comment on that at all?
Yes, because I think, I mean, it isn't an organized, you tend to think when you say religious, you tend to think of organized religion of some sort, and basically the reason I use that so much is that I think there's one thing that we all have in common, and that's that source of energy that keeps our hearts beating, you know, and to me that represents God, or whatever that mystery or mysterious power is that we all have, and that's one of the things we have in common. And I think that's a unifying thing, and it may in fact be one of the reasons why we have so many organized religions and why they were developed, is to bring people together.
Which is obviously the absolute antithesis to prejudice.
It's one of the things which divides us. And one of the things which unifies us is the things that we have in common.
This may not be the best of worlds, but I'll be damned if I'm not going to try to understand it. All the things which divide, when you put them aside, will it show he's one of us? Ethnically, a racial reference, nationality or sexual preference, the shade of his skin, or maybe his religion, all the things which divide, when you put them aside, will it show he's one of us? He struggles to grow, suffering for his sanity, trying to fulfill his life, his love and sexuality. Is he one of us, you ask? Is he one of us? What's the difference? He hurts and he cries. He laughs and he tries. Feels pain just like us. Then one day he dies. All the things which divide, when you put them aside, we may find he's one of us. And if we look at the world as one nation, all people as one human race, and get in touch with all our feelings, there would be no doubt he's one of us. He's one of us. He's one of
I know the play here at the Greenwich House is sold out, New York City street show, but that doesn't mean it's going to make money. How do you finance your shows? How did you get your first money to start?
Well, in 71, the first year that I did street theater, first of all, there's no money in street theater, which is not only performed on the streets, but in the parks and in other places and festivals, but you don't have an audience who's paying, so we have to rely upon funding from government agencies, either the city, state, or federal government. And in the first year, I was working for another company, right? And I was told that they didn't have money to pay me.
Yes.
So I happened to know someone at Cultural Affairs where they were getting their money, and they were getting large sums of money, and he said they're using your name to get funds. In other words, they're saying we found this person and we taught him to write and we're doing all this stuff, and they were getting funds, and he said, if you start your own company, a non-profit organization, we will give you funds. So I did that in 72, and the city gave me like $8,000 to do a production. And ever since then, that was when the city had money.
That's right, yeah.
They don't anymore. They don't give you anything anymore. And but that was my entree to going to the state and to the National Endowment. And actually, the person at the National Endowment was the person who was at Cultural Affairs. So it's nice to meet people and make friends because they appreciate your work and appreciate you, and then you get some funds.
Particularly people with money.
Well, or people in the position to get you money, even if it's not people with money. Right. And I think now we pretty much have to rely on individuals, and sometimes hopefully business gets more involved in giving funds to projects like this.
Yes, they're beginning to do that. They're moving in that direction somewhat, not yet.
Right. Well, I think that one of my reasons for coming indoors is also you have a box office, and after 6 years, I have to start thinking about money and not having to go begging and pleading to funding organizations and councils and waiting long periods of time for money that doesn't come in until after the project's over, and it's nerve-wracking, and suddenly I'm part of the bureaucracy, you know. So I would like some independence, and I think being indoors and in the theater and setting up a box office and doing that is so that I can become independent. Then if I wanted to go into street theater and do a show, I don't have to go to anybody. I can just do it.
I'm somebody, damn it. I'm just as good as you. I'm somebody, damn it. Don't treat me like you do. Riot, 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 riot. Sick of you treating me like dirt. Riot, I've been waiting too long to get it out. Now I don't care about anybody. Shout riot, I don't give a damn who you are, see. I'll kill the first one to get near me. Riot, I don't care who gets hurt. No, you're not even people, you're dirt. Riot, now I don't believe in nothing at all. I'll kick the first one in the head to fall. Now I'm the one who's out to kill. Don't think I'm kidding, 'cause damn it I will. I'll tear down this whole stinking place. Get a little closer and I'll spit in your face. Remember when you had me down that way? Son of a bitch, you better pray. Get yourself together and kill me right now. You better think fast and you gotta know how. Riot, I'm out to see blood. I'm sick of my face being pushed in the mud. Riot, I'll cut out your guts and see you where it hurts, 'cause you're all nuts. Riot, come on and kill me if you can. Just don't treat me less than I am. Riot, 'cause that's what I'll do. I won't take any more BS from you. I'll cut your throat so you'll never put me down again. I'll cut out your heart 'cause you never felt a thing. You never felt a goddamn